Anderson. Hope everyone is doing well today. I'm broadcasting off of a different camera. I'm hoping that this camera does a good thing like my other cameras do. We wanted to jump on, give everybody an update that has been being asked in the office, which is, can your employer require a COVID vaccination for employment? So, first off, let me answer that question in the very beginning that no court has ruled on this subject to my knowledge, and so we don't know how the courts feel about this. We don't know how judges are going to interpret this, but we do have some guidance from the EEOC and from HIPAA and from some other agencies that I'm going to compile and give you so that you have some reasonable information. This video is for employers and it's for employees. And so this is the best information I can give you as of May 26, 2021. First off, can the government mandate COVID vaccinations currently? And the answer to that question is definitively no, they cannot. The government cannot mandate that you take a COVID vaccination because at the current time, COVID vaccinations are under something called an EUA, or what's called an emergency use authorization. So under EUA, under the federal law, the government cannot mandate you to take a COVID vaccination. So the government, President Biden or Governor Northam or whoever your governor is, could not tell you today that as an operation of law you must take the vaccination in fear of some penalty that would be prescribed if you didn't. However, we're flipping away from that and we're going to talk about employers here. And the question is can an employer require you to take a COVID vaccination? And as I just said, that's not been answered in the courts, but the EEOC has given us some guidance on this, and there is a developing area of law that is coming out of these answers. So let's talk about first new hires. Can an employer require that in order to hire you that you have proof of your COVID vaccination? The answer to that question as of today seems to be yes. We have seen lots of major employers taking this position. Delta Airlines is the most recent. So as a new hire, an employer seems to be able to require that you have to take a COVID vaccination. But it's a little bit more gray when you are already in the company. So companies like Delta are saying, yes, you have to have a COVID vaccination to be hired, but we're not going to require that, mandate that amongst our employees that are currently here. So these seem to be decisions that employers are individually making. But let's say that you work for an employer and your employer mandates that you have to have proof of your COVID vaccination to continue your employment. The EEOC is saying in their guidance that that is okay so long as there is some causal connection to that demand and the employer's ability to assess risk to its workforce or to its customers. So, an extreme example, say you work in a hospital, you're a nurse. If the hospital that you work in says you must take a COVID vaccination, they would have an easier argument to say that they're assessing workforce and customer patient risk because of you having that. But let's say that you worked in a call center and that call center was allowed you to work from home, and you're completely at home and you're not in the workplace. Could your employer require that? And they would have a harder time requiring that if you were at home and you weren't you're working from home and you're allowed to work from home. All right, now let's dive into the people that actually don't work at home but work in a job. So I saw a city commissioner of revenue recently just said that all the employees have to get COVID vaccinated in order to continue their employment. There are two exemptions that can be claimed under the law. The first one is a religious exemption, and the second one is a medical exemption. So for religious exemptions, you have to have a sincerely held religious belief. That's the terminology. Now, this has to be a tenet of the religion that you belong to. So, if you go to your employer and you say, I can't take the COVID vaccination because I have a sincerely held religious belief, your employer is allowed to ask follow up and general questions. They're allowed to ask what faith you belong to. They're allowed to ask the place where you commonly worship, and they're allowed to verify that. So, it has to be a real religion. It can't be some religion that your uncle went online and became a clergyman overnight on some online website and then started a religion that said, we don't take the COVID vaccination. It has to be a legitimate religion that has in its religious tenets a ban of taking vaccinations. And so, if you're going to require a religious exemption, you would have to be firmly associated with that. You'd have to provide your employer proof. Medical exemptions, you'd have to have a letter from a doctor that says you can't take the vaccination for whatever medical reason there is. Okay, so if you have a medical or a religious exemption, then your employer should be providing you with a accommodation. And generally what an accommodation may look like is you have to wear masks, you have to socially distance, you have to have PPE, you have to protect you, the non-vaccinated, from the people that are vaccinated. And so, if you have an employer that is mandating that you have to be vaccinated, which seems to be allowed under the way the current law is, then you could ask for an exemption under the sincerely held religious belief exemption or the medical exemption. If you have a doctor, then your employer should provide an accommodation. Now, if they don't, then the question is going to have to be answered by the courts as to whether that would be a unlawful demand. If you don't fall under the religious exemption or the medical exemption, then as it is right now, the EEOC is saying that employers can require you can require proof of vaccinations so long as the assessment to risk of workforce or customers can be established. Okay, now important to understand this this right now. The law needs to evolve, and the law can evolve one of two ways. New laws can be passed, such as in the Virginia General Assembly, that would specifically address whether employers could do this, or courts could address whether the EEOC's interpretation and other interpretations are correct. And so we don't know if the courts are going to come online on this issue. But what I can definitively tell you is there's nothing specifically in the law that directly addresses this question. So what we're doing is we're taking bits and pieces from other areas and we are putting them together. Now finally, I want to talk about HIPAA because that comes up quite a bit. HIPAA is related to healthcare providers providing your medical records without your consent. All right? It has absolutely nothing to do with you giving your healthcare records to your employer. And so there is in no circumstances, no facts ever going to be a HIPAA violation if your employer requires you to produce a proof of vaccination, because that would be you giving your medical information to your employer. HIPAA only applies to your medical provider giving that medical information to a third party without your consent. So there's no HIPAA violation at all because this doesn't apply under HIPAA. The question is it legal for an employer to require you to produce medical information to either gain employment or to continue employment? And the answer to that question seems to be yes, they can, so long as they are providing accommodations for the religious exemptions or the medical exemptions, and so long as it is being uniformly done across the board. So that's where we are. You may not like the answer. I'm not saying I like the answer, but that's where we are today on May 26, 2021. Clearly, the law needs to evolve, and the easiest way for the law to evolve is to have politicians that will pass laws that would answer this question more definitively. But until that happens, it does appear that we are on track, that employers can require this as a condition of new employment and as a condition of continuing employment. All right, today's May 26, 2021. My name's Tim Anderson. I hope that gives you the answers. May not be the answer you want to hear, but I think it's the accurate answer and the best answer we can give you today. Take care.